Hello everyone. Tonight we're going to take a long, quiet journey into the strange and surprising world of dating in the Middle Ages. A time when love wasn't as simple as swiping right, and romance often required a little bit of poetry, a lot of patience, and sometimes approval from the church, the king, and even your livestock. You might imagine medieval dating as slow dances in castles or knights serenading maidens under the moonlight, but the reality was far more complex, layered with rules, rituals, and cultural expectations that shaped every step of courtship. So get comfortable, take a deep breath, and let's begin. It's the year 1257. The world smells of bread ovens, wood smoke, and manure. In a small village tucked into the rolling green hills of England, a boy named Alfred is watching the sun set behind a cluster of haystacks. He's nearly of age to marry, though he's never even spoken more than a sentence to a girl his age. Yet his father, a flax farmer with a crooked back and a temper to match, has already begun negotiating with the family who owns the next plot of land. In the medieval world, dating, as we understand it today, did not quite exist. There was no asking someone out, no strolls in the park, no awkward dinner conversation over roasted chicken. Instead, courtship was often a transaction, a blending of families, wealth, and property. Love was not always expected. In fact, it was sometimes seen as inconvenient. But that didn't mean romance was dead. Quite the opposite. Among the nobility, courtly love had bloomed into a full-blown cultural phenomenon. This was the age of troubadours, poets and musicians who traveled from court to court, reciting verses about unattainable women, forbidden passion, and lovesick knights dying of heartbreak. These songs, filled with elaborate metaphors about roses and falcons and imprisoned hearts, created an atmosphere where emotions could finally be expressed. In secret, imagine Lady Eleanor of Aquitaine, sitting in her stone tower with cold feet under layers of wool. A letter arrives from a young squire, written in beautiful Latin. It praises her golden hair and her swan-like neck and begs for a glance from her window. The squire might never hope to marry her, but the exchange itself, a stolen letter, a poem wrapped in ribbon, became a kind of emotional performance. It was romantic, yes, but also entirely impractical. Meanwhile, back in the village, things were more grounded, literally. Dating among peasants was tied closely to the seasons. During festivals like May Day or harvest celebrations, young men and women might finally get a chance to speak, dance, and flirt in the open. The maypole dance, for instance, was both a joyful celebration of spring and a rare opportunity for contact between the sexes. Boys would try to impress girls with their strength, maybe by climbing the pole or lifting barrels. Girls, in turn, wore flower crowns and sang songs as they skipped around the ribbons. For many, this was the highlight of the year. But what did a medieval date actually look like? Well, it wasn't called a date, and it didn't involve sitting across from each other in candlelight. More often, it meant sitting in a field, watching sheep, or walking to church together, chaperoned, of course. Conversations were cautious, often arranged by family elders. If a boy was bold, he might give a girl a gift. A wooden comb he carved himself, or a bit of lace stolen from his mother's trunk. If she accepted it, it meant maybe she'd consider him. They didn't talk about dreams or favorite colors. They talked about cows, about how many eggs her family's hens laid this week, about whether the miller's cart broke again. These were not just small talk. They were indicators of stability, readiness for marriage, and how prepared you were to manage a household. And yes, food played a role too. If a boy's family was generous, he might invite the girl and her parents over for pottage, a thick stew made from barley, cabbage, onions, and maybe a bit of pork if they were lucky. Bread was coarse and dark, and everyone ate from the same bowl. Courting didn't mean feeding your beloved chocolate or wine. It meant showing her you had enough grain stored for winter, and maybe a goose that hadn't been stolen by foxes. Even among townsfolk and merchants, dating was often shaped by guilds and apprenticeships. A young apprentice in a cobbler's shop might fall in love with the master's daughter, but unless he completed his training and could afford his own tools, he wouldn't be considered a suitable match. Fathers were practical. They looked for income, skills, and connections, not poetry. Still, young lovers found ways. In some parts of Europe, There were traditions that encouraged intimacy before marriage, but under strict surveillance. For example, in parts of medieval Germany and Scandinavia, there was a custom called bundling. A young man and woman could lie together on a bed, fully clothed, separated by a board or even sewn into separate cloth sacks, to talk through the night. It was, in theory, innocent, but of course, not everyone stayed on their side of the board. And when parents disapproved of a union, couples sometimes ran away together and sought a clandestine marriage. These unions were not uncommon, and though the church discouraged them, they were still valid if made before witnesses and followed by, well, consummation. But in most cases, marriage was a slow-moving machine. Before a wedding, couples had to post bans, public announcements made for 3 Sundays in a row at church, inviting anyone to object. It gave the community time to reveal if one party was already married, or perhaps a runaway from another village. Privacy was rare, gossip was common, and courtship, however sweet, was always under the gaze of others. And so, as the night deepens and you feel yourself drifting further into the stillness, imagine a world lit only by firelight and stars. Imagine the clink of wooden cups at the festival, the soft crunch of boots on a muddy path to church, the smell of bread rising in a clay oven, and 2 people sitting by a river, talking about chickens. Knowing full well that love, in their world, was less about romance and more about surviving the next winter together. But that's only the beginning of how dating unfolded in the Middle Ages. There's much more to explore. Rituals, heartbreaks, noble seductions, village scandals, and even the occasional love potion. Close your eyes, keep breathing, and let the story continue. Now that we've stepped into the candlelit world of medieval courtship, let us go further, deeper into the hidden corners of castles and villages where love, desire, tradition, and duty intertwined like ivy on a crumbling stone wall. Let's leave Alfric behind for now, sitting by the barn, wondering if Edith from the baker's family noticed the way he looked at her across the harvest field. Instead, let us climb the stone steps of a castle in 14th century France, where a noble family prepares their daughter, Isabeau, for a meeting with a potential suitor she has never seen before. This wasn't unusual. For noblewomen, arranged marriages were a part of life from the moment they were born. Isabeau is barely 16, wrapped in layers of wool and linen, a heavy belt around her waist and her hair braided tightly under a veil. She doesn't dress for comfort, but for presentation. Her father has summoned a young baron's son, Charles, whose family owns vineyards and whose mother claims descent from Charlemagne, though no one can prove it. This meeting will not be private. It will take place in the solar, a kind of family sitting room, under the watchful eyes of Isabeau's parents, her aunt, and a servant pretending to sweep but really there to listen. Charles will be allowed to speak to her, but only briefly and always with formality. He may compliment her embroidery or speak of the weather. If he's bold, he might mention the falcons kept on his estate and ask if she's fond of hunting. Stiff, careful, and often painfully awkward. But this, too, was part of courtly love. A strange game of veiled emotions and structured performances. Even in its most poetic form, it was often performative. A knight might pledge his love to a lady he could never marry, calling her his sovereign, writing her sonnets on parchment with ink made from oak gall and iron salts. These letters were exchanged in secret, hidden inside glove linings or delivered by trusted squires. But how real was this love? Often, it was closer to emotional theater than romantic reality. Still, it gave noblemen and women a language of longing in a world where marriages were rarely built on affection. Among commoners, things were more immediate, more tactile. Let us return now to the village, where Alfric finally musters the courage to speak to Edith during St. Martin's Day, a festival marked by feasting and song. A hog has been slaughtered, and the whole village smells of roasted meat and ale. Musicians play lutes and rebecks, and children chase chickens through the muddy square. This is one of the few times during the year when young men and women are allowed, even expected, to mingle. There are games, tug-of-war, sack races, and even riddles shouted across tables. In some villages, there are mock trials for lovers, playful events where boys accuse girls of stealing hearts and girls pretend to defend themselves. It's all in jest, of course, but beneath the laughter is an unspoken understanding. If you like someone, this is the time to make it known. Alfric offers Edith a dried apple wrapped in cloth. It's not much, but in a world without sugar or chocolate, it's sweet enough. She accepts it, and they sit on a log together. They talk about their families, about the goose that escaped the miller's yard, and about the new priest who speaks Latin too fast. There's a rhythm to it, slow, cautious, but sincere. In medieval villages, relationships were often observed before they were formalized. A young man might visit a girl's home and help her family with chores, hauling wood, mending fences, helping with harvest. This wasn't just kindness. It was proof of strength, commitment, and compatibility. Parents paid close attention. Was the boy respectful? Did he speak well? Did he know how to repair a leaking thatch roof? These things mattered more than love poems. And then there were the tokens, gifts exchanged as signs of affection. A lock of hair, a piece of embroidered cloth, a polished stone. These tokens were often worn on the body, tied to a belt, hidden in a sleeve, even sewn into undergarments. If a girl wore a boy's token publicly during a festival, it was seen as a declaration. Sometimes this was the closest thing to a proposal, but not everyone followed the rules. Across Europe, records show countless cases of secret engagements, broken promises, and even elopements. In some towns, it was common for a couple to handfast, a kind of informal betrothal made by clasping hands and swearing loyalty before witnesses. It wasn't legally binding, but it was morally serious. If one party backed out, shame and sometimes lawsuits followed. Even the church couldn't always keep up. Though it required marriages to be witnessed and blessed, many couples married privately, then came to the priest after the fact to make it official. In some regions, there were so many secret unions that bishops issued edicts threatening excommunication for unregistered marriages. Still, love found a way. There were tales of couples who waited years for approval, who defied class expectations, or who married despite family feuds. One such tale comes from a village in Tuscany, where a young shepherd named Paolo fell in love with the daughter of a wealthy olive merchant. The merchant refused to give his blessing, until Paolo, determined, began bringing him fresh cheeses and herbs every morning for an entire year. Eventually, the old man relented, claiming the sheep's milk cheese had won him over. Such stories, though rare, reveal the human heart beneath the rules, the quiet defiance of young lovers in a world that didn't always make space for romance. And of course, not all unions ended happily. When relationships soured before marriage, especially after intimacy, consequences could be severe. Women risked shame, poverty, even banishment. Men, if caught, might be forced to pay fines or marry quickly. These pressures shaped every glance, every touch, every whispered promise beneath the apple tree. As night settles, think of these quiet connections, of glances across the firelight, of songs sung into the wind, of wooden tokens kept under pillows. The world was colder then, and harder, but even there, among mud and duty and custom, hearts still stirred, and young people still dared to hope. There's much more to come. From the scandalous customs of medieval France to the rituals of love in Icelandic sagas, and even the bizarre matchmaking traditions of early monasteries. We will travel further still. Let your thoughts drift like smoke rising from a hearth, and the story will carry you onward. As the embers of the village bonfire fade and the stars settle over distant hills, our story moves on. We've seen the quiet tension of noble encounters, the subtle gestures of peasant love, and the hand-fasting promises whispered by riversides. But what lay behind these rituals, behind the dances and the dried apples, were deeper cultural rules. Rules that shaped what it meant to fall in love, to court, and to eventually wed. Let us now travel eastward, to the forested territories of what we now call Germany, deep in the heart of the Holy Roman Empire. Here, the traditions of love and courtship followed a different tune, one deeply entwined with family honor, property rights, and even superstition. In a small hilltop village near the Rhine, winter is just beginning to thaw. Snow still clings to the northern slopes, but the ground is softening underfoot. The people are preparing for Fastnacht, a pre-Lenten festival marked by masks, music, and mischief. This is one of the few times when the rigid social order loosens, just enough for bold declarations and romantic gestures to slip through. Young men wear painted wooden masks with long noses and spiraled horns. Young women wear garlands of dried herbs and woven wool ribbons in their hair. Beneath the disguises, flirting becomes easier. A boy might slip a carved spoon into a girl's apron as a symbol of interest. If she keeps it, it means she might agree to speak with him after the feast. If she returns it, he must retreat, saving face by claiming it was only a joke. But while such games were part of festival fun, most medieval communities viewed romance as something to regulate, not celebrate. Love was powerful, yes, but dangerous if left uncontained. This was especially true in the minds of priests, abbots, and those who recorded the customs of their time. They worried about temptation, about lust, about unsupervised meetings between boys and girls. As a result, many villages developed systems to monitor courtship. In some areas, especially across Central Europe, there were literal love courts, committees made up of elders or church figures who evaluated whether a match was appropriate. It sounds strange, but it served a social function, protecting reputations, preventing disputes, and ensuring no one was led astray. In these same regions, there were also courtship benches. These were wooden seats built against the outer walls of homes, specifically designed for courting couples to sit on, with an audience, of course. Parents, siblings, and neighbors would conveniently go about their business nearby, always close enough to hear. The couple could talk, but not too intimately. They could sit, but not too close. Sometimes, a younger sibling was assigned to sit between them as a human chaperone, a living reminder of the boundary between affection and scandal. Still, many couples found ways to sneak moments of closeness. They might pass notes folded into songbooks, meet in churches under the excuse of prayer, or talk briefly while fetching water from the village well. Wells were, curiously, frequent settings for love stories across Europe. Perhaps it was the symbolism, water as life, as depth, as reflection, or perhaps it was simply that everyone needed water, and the well became the one place where paths always crossed. And not all dating customs were polite or poetic. In certain rural parts of Scotland and Wales, especially during the darker months, a custom known as bundling persisted. We mentioned it earlier, but here it took on more practical forms. A couple might lie together in bed, fully clothed, with a thick plank of wood between them, or the girl might be sewn into a bundling bag, a kind of giant woolen sack that prevented movement. While this sounds odd to modern ears, it was understood as a chance for couples to speak privately and seriously, about their intentions, about future plans, about marriage. And while temptation was always present, so too was risk. A girl who became pregnant outside of marriage faced ostracization, punishment, and often abandonment. So bundling, despite appearances, was taken seriously. In wealthier towns, particularly those engaged in trade, dating took on new forms. Merchants' daughters might meet young journeymen in marketplaces, at public fountains, or during religious processions. These were rare moments where eye contact could be made, where gestures could be exchanged. A dropped handkerchief, a lingered glance, a hymn sung slightly louder than necessary. Each had layers of meaning, carefully coded. For those who couldn't write, which was most people, these small moments became their love letters. And then there was food. Food, though simple in medieval times, was deeply symbolic. Offering food was not just generosity, it was intention. A man might bring a girl a piece of honeycomb, rare and expensive. He might offer a roasted chestnut, warm from a festival fire. In some regions, giving a girl a spiced cake, a treat made with imported cinnamon or cloves, was equivalent to confessing affection. If she accepted the cake and ate it in front of him, it was a clear signal of interest. And let us not forget the role of the community. In a world of small villages and tight-knit towns, everyone watched everyone. A couple seen walking too closely might become the talk of the tavern. A boy visiting a girl's house too frequently might be asked, plainly, by her father, "Are you here to ask, or to play?" Meaning, were his intentions marriage, or merely mischief? Despite all this, love still found its path. We find records of couples who married without permission, who stood before witnesses and promised themselves to each other in barns, under trees, by rivers, or in secret chapels. Sometimes they were caught, sometimes they weren't, but always they were remembered, both in parish books and whispered village tales passed down from one winter to the next. So as you lie still, letting the quiet weight of time press gently on your thoughts, picture a world where every step of love was deliberate, where every touch, every glance, every shared meal carried meaning, where young people, though surrounded by rules, still managed to find moments of laughter, of beauty, of connection. And tomorrow, well, tomorrow we will cross into another corner of the medieval world, perhaps to the warm hills of Italy, where love songs echoed through stone piazzas, or to the snow-covered forests of Slavic lands, where matchmakers held power and marriage was sealed with bread and salt. But for now, let the soft hum of memory cradle you, and drift deeper into the stillness of a time long gone. The world beneath the stars remained quiet, the crackle of fire fading into the distance as our story glides south, leaving behind the cold German woods and the whispering wells of village squares. Let us now wander into the sun-warmed valleys of medieval Italy, where the language of love was spoken not just in words, but in glances from balconies, in the weaving of silk, in the plucking of lute strings, and in verses penned beneath oil lamps that flickered against stone walls. In the late 13th century, in the city of Florence, love was not merely an emotion, it was a philosophy. The great poet Dante Alighieri, long before becoming a name in schoolbooks, wrote of Beatrice, his muse, whom he loved from afar and saw only a few times. Yet this distant admiration, known as a more courteous or courtly love, was seen as the highest, purest form of desire. To love someone unattainable, without touching, without expectation, this was considered noble. Painful, yes, but noble. And so, love in Italy took on a more poetic, elevated form. In wealthier families, young women were often kept indoors, behind latticed windows or in walled gardens. Their lives were structured, measured, and watched. Daughters of merchants, bankers, and nobles rarely ventured into public alone. But from those same balconies, they watched the streets, watched the world, and sometimes someone watched back. A young man, perhaps the son of a silk merchant, might pass by the same building every morning on his way to the guild. At first, he would only glance. Then, over the course of weeks, he might pause, look up, and hope. If the girl returned the glance, even for a moment, a silent communication began. There were no words, only a tilt of the head, a shift of fabric in the breeze, the faintest of smiles. This slow, cautious dance could go on for months. But eventually, if the man was serious, he would make his intentions known, not to the girl, but to her father. In Italy, as across much of Europe, marriage was not simply a union of hearts, it was a business contract. Families negotiated dowries, examined social standing, and reviewed family histories as though they were ledgers. The girl's opinion might be consulted, or it might not. Some fathers asked. Many did not. The dowry was essential, could include coins, land, linens, livestock, even a vineyard or mill. The more prestigious the family, the larger the dowry expected. In fact, by the 14th century, dowries had grown so burdensome that some fathers with too many daughters simply placed them in convents, not out of piety, but economy. Still, love sometimes bloomed in these rigid structures. Once a match was approved, the couple might be allowed to speak privately, though always within sight of others. They might sit across from each other in the family's garden, drink watered wine, and discuss the Book of Hours, a devotional text often used as an excuse for conversation. In rare cases, the girl might send the young man a handkerchief she had embroidered herself, often scented with dried lavender or rose petals. It was a message of acceptance, and for the young man it was a token to be treasured more than coin. And what of commoners in Italy, those who didn't deal in silks and sonnets? In the countryside outside Siena, peasants followed their own customs. Young men would meet girls during village dances held after the harvest. These were lively affairs with tambourines, rustic food, and storytelling. A boy might impress a girl with his rhythm, with how long he could spin before collapsing, or with the cleverness of his improvised verses. In these rural villages, love was closer to practicality. A good match meant a strong back, a fertile field, and a full root cellar. If a man could promise food and shelter, he could often win approval. But that didn't mean romance was absent. Villagers sang songs by the fireside, many passed down through generations. Songs that told tales of secret meetings, of stubborn fathers and lovesick daughters, of weddings blessed under the moon. And of course, there was the ever-present church. In Italy, especially, the influence of the church over love and marriage was profound. Priests not only preached against lust, they carefully recorded marriages, betrothals, and even promises of intent. Once a promise was made before witnesses, it was morally binding, even if no priest had been involved yet. Breaking such a promise was scandalous. In some towns, the guilty party would be fined. In others, they would be publicly shamed, made to walk barefoot through the market square or stand outside the church with ashes on their heads. These public rituals of repentance were meant not only to punish, but to remind others of the seriousness of love's commitments. Yet, despite the warnings, the love letters still flowed. Many of these letters survive in archives. Pages written in careful Italian, some with smudged ink or teardrops staining the parchment. They speak of longing, of promises, of fears. They were often copied from books or dictated to scribes by those who could not write. And sometimes they were burned by angry fathers, jealous rivals, or the girls themselves, fearful of discovery. Even language played a role in romance. Italian, already a musical tongue, was rich with metaphors. A beloved might be called a stella del mattino, a morning star. A kiss was a petal of the soul. These phrases weren't just pretty, they were protection. By speaking in metaphor, lovers could hide their meaning, cloak it in beauty, and deny it if caught. As night deepens, imagine a quiet street in Verona. Stone buildings press close together, shadows stretch along the alleyways, and a young man beneath a window whispers a verse he heard from a passing troubadour. The shutters remain closed, but a faint candle flickers behind the curtain. It's not much, but it's enough to hope. And so, in every region, love followed its own path, sometimes harsh, sometimes soft, often silent, but always there, pulsing beneath the structure of medieval life. As we drift further into this quiet journey, we have yet to visit the icy fjords of Scandinavia, where courtship happened in longhouses beside smoking hearths, or the windswept plains of Eastern Europe, where matchmakers held the fate of entire families in their ledgers and chants. But for now, let your thoughts settle among the olive groves and stone alleys of Italy, where silk and longing wove their own kind of music, where even a glance from a balcony could bloom into a story that would outlive the century. Let us now leave behind the sun-soaked stone of Italy and journey northward once again, through the quiet pine forests, over rolling hills, past windmills and icy rivers, until we reach the cold, wind-bitten lands of Scandinavia. Here, in the fjords and forests of what we now call Norway, Sweden, and Denmark, the customs of love were shaped not by balconies and sonnets, but by long winters, communal fires, and the rhythm of survival. The medieval Norse world, both before and after Christianization, held a unique view of relationships. Love was not an abstract ideal but something practical, personal, and at times deeply poetic. While the sagas of the Viking Age had already been written down by the 12th and 13th centuries, they continued to echo through the medieval mindset, tales of brave women, bold men, and marriages sealed with oaths as strong as oak. In the longhouses of rural Scandinavia, courtship was rarely private. Families were tightly knit, living together under the same turf-covered roof. These structures were long and narrow, with a central hearth that provided warmth and light. All life took place around that hearth. Meals, storytelling, weaving, carving, and yes, courting. If a young man was interested in a woman, he would first seek the approval of her family, especially her father, but often also her brothers and uncles. Without that permission, his chances were slim. Once allowed, he might sit beside her while she worked, carding wool, churning butter, braiding rope. These moments, surrounded by family and glowing embers, were the Scandinavian version of intimacy. A conversation about fishing or the next gathering might carry a layer of meaning that everyone pretended not to notice. Gifts were essential. A suitor might present a finely carved wooden cup, a comb made from polished bone, or, if he was truly serious, a silver ring passed down through generations. In return, the girl might gift him a piece of hand-woven cloth or embroider his shirt with protective runes stitched subtly beneath the collar. These tokens weren't just romantic gestures, they were promises. And yes, poetry played its part too. Scandinavians had a deep respect for words. The skalds, or poets, were revered, and young men often tried their hand at short verses known as mansanger, songs meant for wooing. These were rarely grand or theatrical like the troubadour ballads of France. Instead, they were quiet, steady, and rooted in nature. You are like snow upon pine, quiet, strong, sudden. My axe is sharp, but your gaze cuts deeper. Simple but sincere. During larger gatherings, such as thing meetings, which were assemblies for settling disputes and discussing laws, young men and women from distant farms might meet for the first time. These gatherings, while primarily political, became important opportunities for connection. After debates concluded, there were feasts. Mead was poured, meat was roasted over open fires, and people danced. The dance, often in a circle, was less about steps and more about movement, about closeness, eye contact, rhythm. Young people observed each other. They watched how one carried themselves, how one spoke, how one treated others. Reputation, after all, traveled faster than the fastest ship. If a boy was cruel to animals, boastful without skill, or disrespectful to elders, he'd find few hearts open to him. Marriage arrangements were still largely contractual, negotiated by families, and included detailed marriage settlements. These were written agreements outlining what each family would contribute: land, livestock, tools, clothing. But even within these structures, young people had voices. It was not uncommon for a girl to refuse a suitor outright, and if she had her family's backing, her decision was final. In the old sagas, we find strong women, many of them fiercely independent, who chose their partners not based on wealth, but on honor, strength, and wit. They were not silent figures passed between fathers and husbands. They were active participants in their own futures. And then there were the love tokens that bound people even across great distances. A strip of cloth embroidered with protective symbols. A piece of driftwood carved into a pendant. A tooth from a hunted animal, worn as a necklace. These objects were believed to carry energy, luck, even fate. Lovers exchanged them before long journeys, whether across sea or snow. Among the Sami people, who lived further north in what is now Lapland, traditions were even more unique. Music played a central role. Young men often crafted a joik, a form of chant or melodic poem, to express their feelings. A joik wasn't necessarily about the person, but of them. It was meant to capture their essence. To joik someone was to hold them in memory, even when separated by mountains. And despite the long winters, despite the cold, despite the struggles of medieval Scandinavian life, love endured, quietly, fiercely. Lovers found time to walk together beneath snow-laden trees. They whispered beneath firs while storms howled outside. They pressed hands over steaming bowls of fish stew, their breath mixing in the cold air between them. Even in marriage, affection was expected. Norse law made it clear that cruelty or neglect could be grounds for separation. Husbands and wives were partners, expected to share duties, raise children, and manage farms as equals in hardship. This understanding was rare in much of Europe, but in the far north, survival demanded partnership over possession. As your eyes begin to close, picture a longhouse, lit by fire, the scent of pine smoke thick in the air. Snow taps gently against the thatched roof. A girl and a boy sit near the hearth, saying little. Her hands move steadily over wool. His fingers carve a spoon from birch. Their silence is not awkward, but full, says everything. And tomorrow, we'll step once more into the world beyond. Perhaps into the Slavic villages, where love was bound by ancient ritual and matchmaking was almost a sacred rite. But for now, rest your mind like a fur cloak upon stone, and let the hush of the north cradle you into sleep. As our journey continues through the slow, murmuring corridors of medieval courtship, let us gently pull aside another heavy curtain of time and observe what happened when affection began to deepen, when subtle glances turned into exchanged letters and admiration slowly gave way to devotion. In an age long before instant messages or romantic getaways, the progression from mere acquaintance to true emotional attachment moved at the pace of the seasons. For the upper classes, courtship was frequently influenced by the structure of courtly love, a concept born in the courts of Aquitaine and Provence, where troubadours wove tales of unattainable ladies and noble knights into poetic tradition. The ideas were sometimes more aspirational than practical, more theatrical than real, but they undeniably colored the behavior of those who had access to education and song. A young nobleman, wishing to impress a lady of equal or greater standing, might compose a verse praising her eyes as radiant as moonlight upon silver, or liken her walk to a swan's passage over still waters. These were not idle compliments but crafted testaments, often written with careful calligraphy on parchment and sealed with wax. If the lady received such a letter favorably, she might reply not with words, but with a token, perhaps a colored ribbon, a sprig of rosemary, or a small handkerchief embroidered with her initials. These gestures held weight, as every small sign was analyzed and interpreted, not only by the lovers themselves but by others in their social circles. Love, in medieval times, was seldom a private affair. In castles and manors, gossip traveled faster than falcons. Maids and stewards, pages and ladies-in-waiting, they all became indirect participants in the game of courtship, sometimes helping to pass along messages, sometimes whispering rumors that could either nurture a blooming affection or snuff it out like a candle in the wind. Trust was a delicate coin not easily spent. But let us not forget the more humble folk, those who tilled the earth, baked the bread, and mended the tools. Their paths to romance were not gilded with poetry or laced with protocol, but were no less profound. In a village bounded by forest and stream, affection grew from familiarity. A young woman might meet a young man at the market square, under the watchful eyes of their elders. Over time, she might notice how he speaks gently to his mother, or how he carries heavy bundles without being asked. He might admire the way she weaves flax into linen, her hands steady and strong, or how she knows the names of herbs that cure coughs or soothe burns. Festivals were among the few moments when modest flirtation could emerge from behind the veil of propriety. During midsummer, villagers would dance around bonfires long into the night, and songs would be sung not just for joy, but to hint at feelings otherwise kept secret. At such events, there was laughter, ale, sweet honey cakes flavored with cinnamon and cloves when they could afford them, and contests of strength or wit that allowed young men to boast while the young women giggled beneath flower crowns. Under the soft twilight, amid the scent of earth and wild blossoms, hands might brush, eyes might lock, and something old as time itself might begin to stir. Still, dating as we know it, a series of private meetings intended to explore compatibility, simply did not exist. Time together was either chaperoned or embedded within communal activities. A walk to the edge of the village might be permitted, especially if it involved checking on the flocks or gathering firewood. But always, there was the awareness that reputation was a fragile thing. One misstep could affect not only the individuals but entire families. Thus, discretion became a virtue, and patience was essential. Meals shared together were another tender arena for affection, although rarely shared alone. In noble households, there were great halls with long wooden tables, where roasted meats, stews of lentils and vegetables, coarse bread, and sharp cheese were served from communal platters. Couples might find themselves seated nearby during such feasts, using these moments to exchange quiet glances or soft-spoken words over goblets of mead or watered wine. For the common folk, shared meals were simpler. Perhaps a pottage simmered over the hearth, a slab of rye bread, or a handful of dried fruit. Yet the sense of warmth and quiet comfort they brought could be just as intimate. Let us not forget the rituals that marked growing seriousness. In some parts of Europe, the custom of handfasting emerged as a kind of trial marriage, often lasting a year and a day. Two individuals would clasp hands before witnesses, vowing fidelity for that span of time, after which they could decide whether to part ways or proceed to marriage. This was not universally practiced but was a powerful symbol where it occurred, offering a glimpse of a more personal, consensual pathway to love. And as we drift further into the centuries, the influence of the church became ever more pronounced. Courtship was increasingly folded into religious frameworks, with marriage treated as a sacred sacrament. Parish priests began to oversee betrothals, and banns were read aloud during Sunday Mass, giving the community a chance to voice any objections. This formality, while adding structure, also constrained spontaneity. Love had to wear the clothes of duty and devotion. But even amid the expectations and constraints, human nature found ways to express itself. A man might carve his beloved's name into a tree. A woman might hum a tune that only her suitor recognized. In winter, footprints in snow might reveal a secret meeting spot. In spring, a bouquet left on a doorstep could speak louder than words. Though the forms changed, the longing remained timeless. And so, as the moon rises again over the thatched roofs and candlelit halls of medieval life, we begin to sense how love, ever patient and endlessly adaptive, found space to breathe within the strict rhythms of the time. It was quieter, perhaps, than we might expect, gentler, slower, more attuned to the turn of the seasons than the ticking of a clock, but no less real. Let the night hold this chapter gently, and we shall soon explore how courtship moved toward promises more permanent than flowers and glances. There were no candlelit dinners in cozy restaurants, no movies to attend, and certainly no texting sweet nothings before bed. And yet, the dance of romance in the medieval world was far from devoid of charm. In fact, the complexities of courtship in the Middle Ages were often so nuanced and layered that they bordered on theatrical. A nobleman's serenade beneath a tower window, a lady's glance across the hall during a feast, the silent exchange of a handkerchief, all were subtle acts laden with meaning. But what happened when two individuals actually succeeded in capturing each other's hearts? What did a medieval date, or rather, a socially acceptable interaction between two potential lovers, truly look like? Imagine a sunny day in a medieval village. The air is thick with the scent of livestock and freshly baked bread. A festival is taking place, perhaps the feast of a local saint or a seasonal celebration like May Day. These events were rare moments of release for villagers, a time when strict social rules softened and the barriers between genders loosened just a little. For many young people, this was one of the few chances they had to interact openly with members of the opposite sex. At such festivals, games and dances were common, and unlike the rigid formality of courtly love, these village interactions had a certain playfulness. Men and women might engage in singing competitions, tug-of-war contests, or even flirt through playful insults, a kind of medieval banter that masked deeper interest. Dancing was the heart of it all. Holding hands, moving in rhythm, stealing glances. The village dance floor was the ultimate dating ground for the lower classes. The steps might seem simple, but each movement carried layers of meaning. A lingered touch, a shared laugh, even a misstep might become an opportunity to connect. Now, step back into the world of the nobility, and the picture becomes more elaborate. If a nobleman wished to spend time with a lady of similar rank, he could not simply invite her for a stroll. Meetings had to be chaperoned, often held in gardens, libraries, or during religious events. A monk might be watching, a stern aunt, a younger sibling designated as an unblinking guardian. And yet, within these constraints, clever lovers found their way. They exchanged poetry, shared books, played chess, or even composed music together. Every interaction was coded, layered with messages that only the two of them understood. Clothing also played its part in this intricate game of love. A lady might wear her hair a certain way, a silent invitation. A gentleman might arrive wearing a color or token that referenced a private joke or memory. And speaking of tokens, the giving and receiving of gifts was a common thread in medieval dating. A ring, a ribbon, a brooch. These items were not just ornamental. They carried sentiment, often secretly engraved or infused with herbal scents believed to carry magical properties. A sprig of rosemary meant remembrance. A violet spoke of modesty. A red carnation whispered of love. But even in romance, social rules loomed large. A lady's reputation was her most valuable asset, and a single misstep could ruin her future. Men, too, walked a fine line. Wooing the wrong woman, especially one promised to another, could lead to duels, exile, or worse. So discretion was not just polite, it was survival. And yet, for those fortunate enough to find themselves in each other's company, whether in the echoing halls of a castle or the muddy fields of a village fair, the act of simply being together felt monumental. A glance could be electric, a shared moment under the stars, unforgettable. Even when chaperones hovered and social norms pressed down like stone, the heartbeat of something tender, something real, continued to thrum. Meals were another rare opportunity for closeness. At feasts, seating arrangements were deliberate, but proximity allowed for quiet conversation. The foods they shared were often symbolic. Apples, for instance, tied to temptation and love. Honey cakes represented sweetness in affection. Wine, when available, loosened tongues and perhaps encouraged bold confessions. After the meal, some might wander through castle gardens or along village paths, still under supervision, but with just enough freedom to let their feelings bloom in low whispers and nervous laughter. For those in love, even the structure of the day offered secret advantages. The hour after Vespers, when the church bells tolled and shadows grew long, was one of the rare moments when lovers might speak privately, if only for a moment, behind the shadow of a chapel or beneath the overhang of a cloister wall. A brief touch, a stolen word, the rustle of fabric as they pulled apart before being discovered. These moments, short and fragile, were the lifeblood of medieval romance. It is tempting to think of the Middle Ages as cold, distant, and passionless. But within the boundaries of duty and propriety, within a world bound by custom and consequence, love did bloom. And in many ways, the obstacles themselves made it sweeter. A love that endured despite rules, that grew in the cracks between expectations. It was a love that meant something. A love that was earned. And yet, while public spaces like marketplaces, feasts, and festivals offered the backdrop for casual glimpses and brief conversations, the private sphere of courtship held far more subtle intricacies. In castles and manor houses, among the elite, there was often a layer of formality so rigid it bordered on ritualistic. When a young noblewoman came of age, her family would begin the search for a suitable match. Suitability wasn't measured by love or affection, but by land, lineage, and alliances that might tip the scale of power just slightly in favor of one family over another. Even so, there were moments, small windows in an otherwise calculated process, where personal feelings tried to find a foothold. Imagine the candlelit halls of a stone keep, dim and cold except where the fire's glow warmed the tapestries. The lady of the house would be seated at her embroidery frame, delicately threading colored silk through linen while nearby, a bard sang tales of tragic romance. A suitor, having been invited to dine, would be granted a short time to engage in conversation, usually in the presence of a chaperone, an aunt, a nursemaid, or an older sister who took her role as guardian of propriety very seriously. Even in such constrained moments, glances were exchanged, phrases chosen with deliberate care, double meanings buried under layers of politeness and metaphor. A reference to a falcon might not be about the bird at all, but about the suitor himself, strong yet trainable, eager yet in need of gentle guidance. Courtship, in many ways, was a game of language. In letters, lovers might hide their intentions in poetry or biblical references. A knight writing to a lady might compare her to the Virgin Mary, both to flatter and to suggest purity. She might reply with a verse of her own, borrowing lines from popular chansons de geste, subtly approving or denying further pursuit without ever stating her decision outright. This elegant exchange of veiled intentions was both art and necessity, a means to navigate the rigid expectations of class and decorum without inviting scandal. And food, yes, food played its part in this quiet theater. While most peasants subsisted on pottage and dark rye bread, the noble classes indulged in meals that doubled as social rituals. Banquets were arranged with layers of symbolism. The placement of a guest, the offering of a cup, even the type of meat served might carry a message. To sit beside someone of the opposite sex was to be honored, but also observed. Eating with grace, carving a roast with skill, or offering a well-timed toast could serve as subtle demonstrations of one's worthiness. But the most romantic gesture, quiet though it might have seemed, was often the presentation of a small token, perhaps a woven ribbon, a ring, or a sprig of rosemary tied with a silken thread, handed over in the hush of a corridor or left beneath a plate during the meal. Then there were the dances. Ah, the dances. In medieval Europe, dancing wasn't simply entertainment. It was a rare chance to physically connect, however briefly, under the watchful eyes of others. The steps were slow and formal, the touch of a hand fleeting, the turn of a wrist deliberate. A lady's sleeve might brush a knight's arm, and that single moment of contact could become the source of weeks of daydreams. There were dances like the estampi, lively and full of intricate steps, and the far more subdued saltarello, where the emphasis was on form and elegance. It wasn't just movement, it was a performance, a declaration of civility, grace, and, in some cases, affection. Of course, not every love story followed the rules. There were moments when passion burned too brightly to be contained. Secret rendezvous in chapel corners, notes passed through the slits of castle walls, promises whispered in the gardens just before dawn. There are accounts, though rare and often scandalous, of noblewomen defying their families to run off with a favored knight or troubadour. These tales, passed down in hushed tones or immortalized in songs, were both cautionary and tantalizing. They reminded everyone that even in a world built on duty and decorum, the human heart could still rebel. Meanwhile, among the peasantry, courtship was shaped by labor, by proximity, and by shared survival. A young man might show his affection by helping with a neighbor's harvest, or by crafting a small gift, perhaps a carved spoon or a set of hand-stitched gloves. The village green served not just as a space for grazing animals, but also for seasonal celebrations where young people might dance and flirt, laugh and drink, their futures unwritten and largely unobserved. In these moments, love bloomed more freely, without the weight of dynasties or dowries. But it too had its customs, its rhythms set by the seasons and the church calendar, its boundaries drawn by gossip and tradition. And yet, regardless of class or custom, the ache of longing, the thrill of attention, the fear of rejection, all these emotions were as vivid then as they are now. Beneath the armor, beneath the veils and gowns, there were still hearts beating too fast, hands trembling with anticipation, minds replaying every glance and every word until the meaning blurred into desire. Let us now step further into these stories, looking not only at how love was sought but at how it was won or lost. In the strange and beautiful world of medieval romance, and while noble courtship followed its own elaborate script, let's not forget the quieter yet equally heartfelt romances among the peasants. Those who tilled the land, carried water from the well, and rarely had the luxury of a private word alone. For them, love was often forged not in song or poetry, but during shared chores, fleeting glances in the fields, or simple conversations at the village well. Courtship wasn't announced with grand feasts or serenades, but with the modest offer of a basket of apples, or an invitation to walk home after the harvest festival. Still, these quiet moments were often more sincere than the pageantry of noble courts, because they were rooted not in alliances or expectations, but genuine affection, curiosity, and shared daily struggles. Imagine a young woman carrying a bundle of firewood along a muddy path. A boy, barely older, with calloused hands and a shy grin, offers to help. She says no at first, of course, because that's the dance. But he insists, and they walk together in silence at first. Then laughter fills the space between them. That walk becomes a ritual over the weeks, a simple routine of companionship that deepens. There are no letters exchanged, no veils lifted before a king's blessing, just hands occasionally brushing, eyes meeting over a shared loaf of bread, the warmth of another presence during the long, cold evenings. But even in these simpler relationships, rules existed. In many villages, there were chaperones, often elderly women, who would keep a watchful eye on the interactions of young couples. Not because they were nosy, but because honor and modesty were currencies as valuable as gold. A scandal, even a whisper of impropriety, could stain not only the reputation of a young woman but her entire family. This meant that while young people might sneak glances or whisper beneath the eaves, Physical expressions of affection before marriage were rare and, in many places, strictly forbidden. And yet, the human heart is resourceful. There were old customs like bundling, a curious tradition practiced in some regions, particularly among the lower classes. Here, a courting couple might be allowed to spend the night together in the same bed, but fully clothed, often with a wooden board or large bundle of hay separating them. It was a compromise, a strange blend of intimacy and restraint, allowing couples to talk long into the night, building emotional bonds while maintaining the appearance of virtue. It sounds absurd now, but for many, this was the only private time they could have, especially in crowded homes where privacy was nearly non-existent. And not every romantic pursuit ended in bliss. Sometimes, love was unrequited or worse, forcibly arranged against one's wishes. While we often imagine medieval love stories as filled with valor and sacrifice, the reality could be grimmer. A woman might find herself married off to a man twice her age for the sake of a land deal, or a young man might be forbidden from marrying the girl he adored because her dowry wasn't enough. Heartbreak wasn't poetic. It was cold, bureaucratic, sealed with a contract and witnessed by neighbors who offered no solace. Still, festivals remained moments of escape and possibility. Events like May Day or the Harvest Festival gave the young a fleeting glimpse of freedom. Bonfires lit up the night, and dances allowed couples to touch hands in rhythm under the open sky. Flowers were worn in hair, cider flowed freely, and even the sternest fathers might look the other way for an evening or two. It was in these moments, between the dancing, the games, and the whispered promises, that true feelings could surface, if only briefly. And oh, how much power there was in a glance. A well-placed look across the room, a glance that lingered just a second longer than it should, could set entire stories into motion. In a time when open declarations of affection were rare, the subtleties of body language spoke volumes. A smile could mean everything. A raised eyebrow, a tilt of the head, or even the deliberate brushing of fingertips during a shared chore could electrify the air. Because in the end, whether noble or commoner, whether spoken in Latin or in local dialect, the language of love always found a way. And though the clothing, the customs, and the circumstances were so very different, the feelings, the hope, the nervousness, the joy, and even the heartbreak were as timeless as the stars above the thatched roofs. But even courtship, in all its varied forms, was just one step in a long path. What came after, the promises, the doubts, the negotiations, would reveal much more about what love meant in a society where marriage was often less about romance and more about survival, security, and legacy. So let's now walk a little further into that journey, beyond the flirtations and games, to see what truly awaited those brave enough to seek a life together. The idea of courtship in the Middle Ages wasn't always about romantic dinners or long walks beneath the moonlight. In many ways, it was more of a public performance, one governed by family, class, and obligation. For the nobility especially, a relationship often began not with a fluttering heart, but with a calculated whisper between parents or a document sealed with wax. But that didn't mean affection never found its place. Hidden in the margins of expectations, two hearts could still beat a little faster when their eyes met across a crowded banquet hall or during a quiet moment by the castle gardens. Take, for example, a noblewoman in 13th century France, perhaps the daughter of a minor baron. Her days were structured and predictable. She would wake at dawn, assisted by a maidservant who helped her into her gown, likely made of dyed wool or imported silk if the family could afford it. The lacing and stitching could take nearly an hour. Her hair would be braided or coiled under a fine veil, as modesty and reputation were paramount. Breakfast was simple, perhaps coarse bread dipped in honey or milk, or thin ale if the water was unreliable. After morning prayers, her day might include embroidery, practicing the lute, or reading religious texts in Latin, depending on her education. Social events, however, were where possibilities arose. Tournaments, feast days, or even church processions offered rare opportunities to glimpse a potential suitor. And these events, grand and often chaotic, were among the few socially acceptable spaces where young men and women could interact, however briefly. During a feast, the hall would echo with music from minstrels, clinking goblets, and laughter. Roasted meats were passed down long tables, often carved by servants directly onto trencher bread that doubled as a plate. There were stews spiced with imported saffron, pies filled with game, and sweetmeats served with mulled wine. A young woman might steal glances at a knight recently returned from campaign, noting the embroidery on his tunic or the crest on his signet ring. Meanwhile, her mother or a chaperone would sit nearby, pretending not to notice. When a man was interested, he wouldn't approach directly, not at first. Instead, he might send a token, perhaps a handkerchief, a ring, or a miniature illuminated poem copied by a scribe. This gesture, inspired by the traditions of courtly love, was often more symbolic than personal. But the contents of the message could be surprisingly tender. A few rhyming lines praising her eyes or her grace, usually in the style of troubadours from Aquitaine or Provence. The woman, in turn, could respond by accepting the token, which signaled tentative approval, or declining it by returning it unopened. If she accepted, their next encounter might be more formal. A walk through the garden, accompanied by family, or perhaps a seat together at Mass, separated by only a few others in the pews. During these encounters, they spoke little. Every word was weighed, every glance noted. Even gestures held meaning. The way she held her sleeve, whether she lowered her gaze or met his eyes directly, might send a signal. Gloves, for example, were highly symbolic. A lady handing a knight her glove was a mark of favor. He might wear it during a joust, tucked into his armor, visible to all. But let us step away from the castle and look at the peasants, where the rituals were humbler, but no less rich in meaning. A village girl of marrying age might help her mother churn butter or tend the goats. Her hands would be calloused, her dress homespun, yet she too was part of the delicate dance of affection. At the village well, she might exchange jokes with a neighbor's son. During planting season, working side by side in the fields, their laughter might become more frequent. The village dances, held in the open air during feast days or weddings, offered the most open opportunities for flirtation. The music played by fiddlers and pipers filled the summer night, and with the sun setting behind the thatched roofs, hands would touch during the reels, eyes would linger, and something tender might begin to form. The peasant courtship often involved tokens too, though these might be a carved wooden trinket, a bundle of herbs, or a small loaf of bread. Practical, heartfelt gifts. And when a boy was truly serious, he might carve his initials with hers into the bark of an old oak, or walk her home after the evening bell, careful to keep to the path and avoid the eyes of the reeve. Yet love was not always easy, and customs varied across regions and faiths. In parts of medieval England, bundling was a curious tradition. During long winters, when warmth was scarce and homes were small, a suitor might be invited to sleep beside the girl he fancied, fully clothed and separated by a board or blanket. It was, in theory, chaste, and while some families allowed it, others found the practice scandalous. Religious festivals also played a role in relationships. During May Day celebrations, young men would compete to present the finest garland to a girl, while in Germanic lands, Pentecost or Shrovetide brought masked festivities where identities could briefly blur. Under the safety of disguise, whispered declarations became bolder, hearts braver. But no matter the class or the region, one thing was clear: courtship was rarely private. Whether noble or peasant, the gaze of family, church, and village bore down upon lovers like the stone eyes of cathedral gargoyles. Still, within this framework, people found a way to connect, to hope, to feel. And sometimes, in spite of the rules, two people might meet in secret. A walled garden, a chapel at dusk, a barn loft in harvest season. There, far from the prying eyes of society, they might talk freely for the first time, about dreams, fears, or perhaps just the rhythm of the rain on the thatch above. And in those quiet, stolen moments, love in the Middle Ages felt very much like love today. Imagine, then, a night cloaked in mystery and soft moonlight, a secret meeting in a garden hidden behind the high stone walls of a manor house. The air is thick with the scent of blooming roses and damp earth. Every step taken on the gravel path seems louder in the quiet, each heartbeat echoing louder than the last. A young noblewoman, her veil lightly brushing her cheeks, waits beneath an ancient oak whose gnarled branches seem to guard the secret she holds close. She clutches a small, embroidered handkerchief, its delicate lace edges hiding a secret message stitched in invisible thread. From the shadowed archway emerges her suitor, a knight freshly returned from battle, his armor left behind but his heart still pounding with the thrill of the chase. His eyes search the darkness until they meet hers, bright, defiant, and alive. No words are spoken at first. None are needed. Their gazes carry volumes, years of longing, whispered prayers, and dreams of a life beyond the rigid walls of duty. But danger presses close. The flicker of torches down the hallways reminds them that their time is limited. Every second stolen is a gamble. If caught, the consequences could ripple like a stone cast into a still pond. Family disgrace, broken alliances, or worse. Yet, this risk only deepens the sweetness of the moment, sharpening the edges of forbidden desire. In these stolen meetings, lovers would exchange tokens. Perhaps a lock of hair, carefully cut and tied with a ribbon dyed the color of twilight, or a pressed violet, known to symbolize modesty but whispered affection. The simple act of giving carried enormous weight. It was an unspoken promise, a bond forged in secrecy, and the stories that grew from these moments were whispered long after, carried by troubadours who sang of love that defied kings and priests alike. Tales where a knight braved peril to steal a kiss beneath the castle battlements, or where a lady escaped the cold stone halls for one midnight dance under the stars. These stories were the spark that warmed cold hearths and filled lonely nights with hope. Yet, outside the castles, in the villages nestled among forests and fields, love played a different tune. Still tender, still secretive, but marked by simpler joys. Picture a crisp autumn day when the harvest moon begins to rise, casting silver light over fields of golden grain. Young men gather to bring in the sheaves, their laughter mingling with the crackle of bonfires. Among them is a shy lad who has long admired a girl with fiery red hair and a smile like the dawn. He watches as she works, her fingers deft and sure, her eyes bright with laughter even when the day's toil is hard. Summoning courage, he approaches with a small gift, a carved wooden bird, its wings spread as if ready to take flight. She accepts it with a shy nod, and for a brief moment, the world narrows to just the two of them, wrapped in the glow of the firelight and the promise of something new. In the days that follow, their meetings grow, passing in the fields, sharing stolen conversations beside the river, laughing as they try to outpace each other across the meadows. Every glance is charged with the silent language of young love, every touch a secret stolen from the watchful eyes of neighbors and kin. But love in the Middle Ages was never simple. It was a delicate dance on a razor's edge, balanced between hope and fear, freedom and obligation. Sometimes, even the strongest feelings could be undone by a single word, a broken promise, or the weight of family duty. So, as you begin to drift into the quiet embrace of sleep, imagine the countless lovers of centuries past, hiding in shadows, sharing tokens, exchanging words heavy with meaning, each story unique, yet all connected by the timeless pulse of the human heart. Now, as the seasons turn and years pass, the bonds forged in whispered meetings and shy glances moved toward a deeper, more binding commitment, the promise of marriage. But marriage in the medieval world was rarely a simple story of two hearts entwined. It was a complex tapestry woven from family alliances, property, and the ever-watchful eyes of the church. In many regions, marriage negotiations began long before any affection was declared. Families would arrange matches to secure land, wealth, or political power. A young woman might find her future decided by elders in a dimly lit hall, where parchments were spread, seals stamped, and terms debated. Love was often an afterthought, a fragile hope to be nurtured once the legalities were settled. Yet, even within this framework, the human spirit found room to breathe. The betrothal ceremony, a solemn event marking the couple's commitment, was both a social contract and a deeply personal moment. Rings were exchanged, not merely symbols but tangible seals of vows made before God and community. These rings were often simple bands of iron or silver, sometimes engraved with initials or religious symbols, worn as a constant reminder of duty and affection. Before the wedding day itself, the couple might spend time in each other's company under careful supervision, learning the rhythms of shared life. They exchanged letters filled with promises, hopes, and sometimes quiet fears. These letters were treasured, read and reread by candlelight, their inked words a lifeline across days and miles. The wedding day was both joyous and weighty. The bride, dressed in her finest garments, often embroidered with family crests and trimmed with fur, would walk to the church accompanied by a procession of kin and neighbors. The groom, clad in his best attire, awaited her beneath the stone arches, his heart pounding beneath layers of fabric and armor. Inside the church, the ceremony unfolded with ritual and reverence. Vows were spoken aloud, hands joined by the priest, prayers whispered for fertility and happiness. The congregation, family, friends, and neighbors witnessed the union, their presence a shield and blessing for the new couple. Feasting followed, with tables groaning under roasted meats, fresh bread, honeyed cakes, and wines from distant lands. Minstrels played lively tunes, and laughter filled the hall. The bride and groom danced their first dance, stepping carefully as all eyes watched, the start of a journey both sacred and uncertain. Yet marriage was not always a promise of happiness. For some, it was the beginning of hardship. Long days managing households, bearing children, navigating complex social hierarchies. But even then, the love born in courtship could grow stronger, a quiet flame in the hearth of daily life. So as your thoughts begin to wander in the quiet night, picture the faces of those who came before, lovers who met in secret gardens, brides who walked to stone churches, families gathered to celebrate new beginnings. Their stories, woven into the fabric of history, remind us that love, in all its forms, is a force both gentle and unyielding. But marriage, as grand as it seemed, was only the beginning of a far more intricate dance. A dance where daily life, duty, and desire intertwined under the heavy cloak of medieval society. Imagine the first days after the wedding, when the newlyweds stepped beyond the church's solemn arches into a world that was at once familiar and transformed. The bride, now lady of her husband's household, faced the enormous task of managing servants, overseeing meals, tending the garden, and ensuring the smooth running of the manor. It was a role laden with responsibility and often with loneliness. The couple's time together was measured and often scarce. Political matters, estate affairs, and social obligations pulled the groom away for weeks, even months. Letters, carefully penned and sealed, became the bridge across these distances, filled with tender words and longing. For those fortunate enough to share a hearth regularly, nights brought a rare chance for intimacy. Not always physical, but in whispered confidences, shared stories, and the quiet comfort of presence. Meals took on a new significance. The great hall, with its long oak tables and roaring hearth, echoed with the sounds of daily life. Dishes varied by season and wealth, stews thick with beans and root vegetables for the common folk, roast venison glazed with honey and spices for the nobility. Bread, baked fresh in stone ovens, formed the foundation of every meal. Sweet treats, honey cakes, almond pastries, and sugared fruits were reserved for festivals or special occasions, rare luxuries that lingered on the tongue like a memory. Dining was a ritual of community and hierarchy. Seating arrangements spoke volumes, and the exchange of food and drink could be as symbolic as any vow. The sharing of bread signified trust. Offering the first bite was a mark of honor. Wine, when available, was poured with care, often diluted with water and spiced with herbs. Mead flowed at celebrations, its sweetness warming cold fingers and loosening tongues. Beyond the meals, entertainment provided moments of joy and escape. Music filled the air, lutes, harps, and flutes creating melodies that echoed through stone corridors and over rolling fields. Minstrels sang ballads of heroic knights and tragic loves, their voices weaving tales that stirred hearts and minds. Dancing, though often formal and restrained, offered a physical expression of joy and connection. The estampi, with its lively rhythm, encouraged feet to move in intricate patterns, while the more solemn carol brought neighbors together in circle and song. Games and pastimes also punctuated life. Chess, a favorite of the learned and noble, was more than a game. It was a battle of wits and strategy, a metaphor for the political maneuverings that defined the era. Children played simpler games, hopscotch, tag, or spinning tops, while adults might enjoy contests of archery, wrestling, or falconry, skills vital for survival and status. Yet, amid these routines and rituals, love found its quiet ways to thrive. A gentle touch on a hand during a moment of shared triumph. A glance exchanged across a crowded hall. The soft brush of a whisper in a moment of vulnerability. These small acts, though often hidden beneath layers of expectation and duty, were the threads that wove intimacy into daily life. And so, as you settle deeper into sleep, envision the flickering candlelight in a medieval chamber, the soft murmur of voices, the steady rhythm of life unfolding. Picture the lovers, noble and commoner alike, who navigated the complexities of their time with courage and hope. Their stories a reminder that even in worlds far removed from our own, the heart's desires remain timeless as days turn to weeks and weeks to months. The rhythm of married life settled into a steady cadence, a blend of routine and rare, cherished moments of tenderness. In a typical medieval household, especially among the nobility, the lady of the manor held responsibilities far beyond what modern eyes might imagine. She was the steward of the household, the manager of servants, the overseer of food stores, and often the keeper of records. Her role was vital. Without her careful hands, the smooth functioning of the estate could falter. Imagine the quiet morning light filtering through narrow windows, casting slender beams on the stone floors. The lady rises early, wrapped in a woolen gown, to oversee the preparation of breakfast. Perhaps coarse bread, thick cheese, and watered ale for the family, with more lavish offerings for honored guests. She moves through the chambers with practiced grace, checking that the household staff is ready for the day, her voice calm but firm as she issues orders. Meanwhile, her husband, the lord of the manor, may be preparing to ride out to inspect the fields or meet with neighboring nobles. Their moments together are brief but meaningful. A shared meal, a whispered word in passing, the comfort of a hand briefly held before departure. Despite the demands of their roles, these small exchanges form the foundation of their connection, a quiet intimacy woven through the fabric of daily life. Entertainment and leisure, though limited by the demands of survival and duty, still played a role in sustaining the spirit. Evenings might be spent by the hearth, where the family gathered to listen to tales spun by a traveling bard or to sing simple songs that echoed ancient stories. The flicker of firelight painted shadows on the walls, and the warmth softened the hard edges of stone and wood. For those in the peasant class, life was a constant cycle of work and rest, toil and celebration. The harvest season brought its own rituals, community gatherings where the fruits of labor were shared, where music and dance lifted weary spirits. Here, too, love was a gentle undercurrent, seen in the way neighbors helped one another, in the stolen moments beside the village well, in the shy smiles exchanged during a break from labor. And yet, not all was serene. The pressures of medieval life, disease, famine, war, cast long shadows over even the most joyful occasions. Marriages could be cut short by untimely death. Alliances forged in hope could unravel in conflict. The ever-present uncertainty lent a preciousness to moments of happiness, making each glance, each touch, each shared meal all the more significant. In this world of contrasts, of hardship and hope, duty and desire, love found a way to endure. It was not always loud or grand, but often quiet, persistent, and deeply human. Through whispered prayers, secret meetings, and the simple acts of daily life, medieval lovers carved out spaces for affection within a landscape shaped by tradition and necessity. So as the night deepens and your mind drifts toward rest, picture the countless hands held in secret, the glances that spoke volumes, the songs sung softly by candlelight. These stories, carried across centuries, remind us that the search for connection, for understanding, and for love is as old as time itself. As the medieval sun dipped low, casting long shadows across the cobblestones and thatched roofs, the rhythms of daily life shifted subtly toward evening, a time both practical and precious. For many, this was the hour when work ceased, and the household gathered to share what little they had, to savor warmth, light, and companionship before the darkness settled in. In noble halls, the evening meal was often a grander affair than the modest breakfasts or midday repasts. Tables groaned beneath platters of roasted meats, venison, boar, and pheasant, flavored with fragrant herbs like rosemary and thyme, their savory aroma mingling with the flickering scent of beeswax candles. Side dishes of spiced vegetables and fresh bread completed the feast, while sweet treats, honey-glazed fruits, almond pastries dusted with sugar, were reserved for those fortunate enough to indulge. For a lord and lady, dining together was both sustenance and ceremony. Seating arrangements signaled rank and favor, and the exchange of dishes or a shared cup of spiced wine could carry quiet messages of affection. Imagine the subtle glance exchanged across the table, a touch of the hand beneath the cloth, a whispered joke amidst the clatter of utensils. Small acts that spoke volumes when open declarations were forbidden or dangerous. But even beyond the walls of stone castles, in the humble cottages of peasants and tradesfolk, evenings held their own charm. Families gathered around hearth fires, their faces glowing in the warm light as they shared simple stews, hearty breads, and bowls of ale or watered wine. The crackling fire provided both heat and company, as stories passed from elder to youth, weaving the fabric of community and memory. It was during these quiet hours that many couples found moments to nurture their bonds. With work done and the world hushed, a husband and wife might sit close, their shoulders touching, sharing tales of the day or plans for the future. Young lovers might steal moments beneath the moonlight, beneath trees, beside quiet streams, or in hidden nooks behind the village walls. These stolen times, brief as they were, became sacred. Music often filled these evenings, lutes strumming gentle melodies, flutes weaving airy tunes, and voices joining in soft songs that celebrated heroes, saints, and lovers alike. Dancing, though more common during festivals, could sometimes find its way into the home, feet tapping lightly on wooden floors, laughter ringing out like bells. And yet, even as joy and tenderness found their place, medieval nights were also shadows of fear and uncertainty. The threat of illness, the danger of raids, the harshness of winter, all these lingered close. Lovers parted at dusk with prayers whispered for safety and return, their hearts heavy with longing. In this mingling of light and dark, love in the Middle Ages showed its resilience. It was shaped by hardship but never extinguished. It found expression not only in grand gestures or secret meetings, but in the steady, quiet acts of everyday life. The shared meal, the gentle touch, the whispered word. So, as your eyelids grow heavy and the world fades softly away, let your mind wander to those ancient nights, where love bloomed in candlelight and moonbeams, where hearts beat steadily amidst the flicker of flame and shadow. Their stories, echoing through the ages, remind us of the enduring power of connection and the tender hope that lives within us all in the tapestry of medieval life. The changing seasons marked not only the cycle of work, but also the rhythm of courtship and celebration. Each season carried its own traditions, its own opportunities for love to blossom beneath the ever-watchful eyes of village and castle alike. Spring, with its gentle rains and bursting blossoms, was a time of renewal and hope. Fields turned green, trees blossomed with white and pink flowers, and the air was filled with the scent of fresh earth and blooming wildflowers. It was during this season that many festivals took place, May Day being one of the most beloved. On this day, villagers gathered to dance around the maypole, a tall, decorated pole wrapped in ribbons and flowers. The dances were lively, filled with laughter and playful competition. Young men and women paired off, their hands brushing as they wove in and out, the ribbons tangling and twisting like the threads of their own budding relationships. For the nobility, spring offered the chance for outdoor entertainments, falconry, jousting tournaments, and leisurely hunts that brought together the court in vibrant displays of skill and status. These events were also ripe with romantic possibility. A knight might dedicate a victory to a lady's honor, presenting her with a prize or a flower plucked from the tournament field. A lady, seated in her finery, would watch the contests with keen eyes, her favor coveted and her smile the greatest reward. Summer followed, long and golden, with days stretched wide by the sun's generous light. It was a season for travel, for visiting relatives, and for attending grand fairs and markets. These bustling gatherings were a mosaic of sights, sounds, and scents. Traders hawking exotic spices, musicians tuning their instruments, children chasing each other between stalls. For young people, fairs were a rare chance to meet others beyond their village or social circle, to dance, to flirt, and to dream. The evening coolness of summer nights was perfect for secret meetings. Lovers might find refuge beneath ancient oaks, their leaves whispering in the breeze, or by the gentle ripple of a stream, where moonlight painted silver patterns on the water's surface. These stolen moments were precious, filled with whispered promises and soft laughter. Autumn arrived with a palette of reds, golds, and browns. It was harvest time, the culmination of months of toil and hope. Villages came alive with celebrations, feasts, and rituals thanking the earth for its bounty. The harvest moon, glowing large and orange, illuminated dances around bonfires. The air was thick with the smell of burning wood, ripe apples, and spiced cider. In this time of plenty, hearts often grew bold. Young men would bring gifts, baskets of fruit, freshly baked pies, to their beloved, hoping to earn favor before the cold months set in. Winter was a season of hardship, but also of closeness. Snow blanketed the land, and the days were short and gray. Inside thick-walled homes, families gathered around roaring fires. The long nights invited storytelling, singing, and reflection. For couples, winter could be a time of deepening intimacy, of planning for the future, and of sharing the warmth of companionship against the chill. Throughout all these seasons, the thread of love wove steadily through life, adapting to the changing world while holding fast to timeless truths. Love in the Middle Ages was as fragile as a spring blossom and as enduring as the ancient stones of castles and churches. It was written not only in grand gestures but in the quiet moments, the glance across the dance floor, the touch of a hand on a cold evening, the gift of a pressed flower in a book. As your thoughts drift gently toward rest, picture the cycles of the year turning softly, carrying with them stories of hope, longing, and connection. Imagine lovers meeting beneath blooming trees, sharing secrets by firelight, and dreaming beneath harvest moons. Their lives, shaped by the land and by custom, remind us that love, no matter the era, finds its way into the hearts of those who dare to seek it. Beyond the festivals and feasts, beyond the carefully choreographed dances and secret meetings, there existed another world where courtship unfolded in quieter, more intimate ways. The world of letters, poetry, and whispered words passed beneath the breath of twilight. In medieval courts and villages alike, writing was both a privilege and a craft, a way to express feelings too dangerous or delicate to speak aloud. Imagine a young knight, seated by flickering candlelight in his chamber, quill poised above parchment. His fingers tremble slightly, not from the chill of the drafty stone walls, but from the weight of his thoughts. How to convey admiration without overstepping bounds. How to praise a lady's grace without inviting scandal. The answer came in carefully chosen words, woven into verses rich with metaphor and allusion. These love letters, often adorned with intricate illuminated initials and delicate drawings of flowers or hearts, were treasured tokens. Delivered by trusted messengers or hidden within the folds of clothing, they carried a secret language known only to sender and recipient. Phrases might describe the lady as a shining star in a darkened sky, or compare her voice to the gentle murmur of a brook. Each word was deliberate, a step in the delicate dance of courtship. For the recipient, the letter was both a balm and a thrill. Reading by candlelight, she might press the parchment to her cheek, savoring the weight of the words as they brushed against her heart. Replies were crafted with equal care, verses penned in return, sometimes borrowing lines from famous troubadours or saints, embedding private meanings beneath public expressions. This exchange of letters was a bridge across distance and decorum. When physical meetings were scarce or forbidden, when family watchers were close, Words carried the flame of affection across miles and weeks. In some cases, these letters formed the foundation of a relationship, their slow unfolding as intimate as any whispered promise. Even in the quieter villages, where literacy was less common, messages of love found their way through simpler means. Carved initials on a favorite tree, gifts left at doorsteps, or songs sung beneath bedroom windows. The heart's language, after all, transcended words. But not all courtship was gentle or kind. In a world where honor and reputation were paramount, rejection could be sharp and public. A declined proposal might lead to whispered rumors, social ostracism, or even feuds between families. For women especially, the stakes were high. A sullied reputation could close doors forever. Thus, many sought to navigate the perils of affection with caution, balancing desire with duty, hope with fear. Despite these challenges, love persisted, weaving through the rigid tapestries of medieval life like a delicate thread of gold. It took shape in secret smiles, in gifts hidden beneath gowns, in letters that carried the weight of entire worlds. So, as the night deepens and your breath slows, picture those gentle exchanges. Ink staining fingers, paper folded carefully, words chosen like precious stones. These acts, small but profound, remind us that the yearning for connection and the courage to express it have always been among humanity's most enduring stories. In those times, the world was not quiet or still, but filled with a vibrant hum of life, music, and ritual. Consider the role of music in medieval courtship. It was the unseen thread that wove through the hearts of lovers, carrying emotions too complex for mere words. Minstrels and troubadours traveled from town to town, their lutes and harps singing of distant lands and noble heroes, but also of love's sweet ache and joy. Picture a great hall bathed in flickering candlelight, where nobles gather after a day's hunting or labor. A minstrel steps forward, fingers deftly plucking strings, his voice weaving a story of a knight who braved dragons and dark forests for the smile of his lady. The tale is both heroic and tender, capturing the imagination and stirring emotions deep within the listeners. The lady listens intently, her eyes reflecting the flames, and perhaps her heart quickens, imagining herself the heroine of such a story. But music was not just for the grand halls. In village squares, during festivals and fairs, lively tunes invited young people to dance and laugh beneath the open sky. The air rang with the sound of fiddles and pipes, and couples twirled in circles, hands clasped tightly, feet tapping the earth in joyous rhythm. These moments were more than entertainment. They were opportunities for connection, for flirtation, and for dreams to take flight. And what of the words sung in those songs? Often, they were poems set to melody, filled with metaphors of nature. The rose, the nightingale, the gentle breeze. These symbols spoke of beauty, longing, and the fleeting nature of life and love. Lovers would share these songs as secret messages, their meanings layered and profound, understood only by those who dared to listen closely. Beyond music and letters, courtship also found expression in gifts, symbols of affection and commitment. Jewelry, of course, played a significant role. Rings, brooches, and pendants fashioned from gold, silver, or precious stones were more than ornaments. They were declarations. A ring might bear the emblem of a lover's family or a religious symbol, serving as a constant reminder of promises made. But simpler gifts were no less powerful. A sprig of rosemary, symbolizing remembrance. A handful of violets, representing modesty and faithfulness. A finely woven scarf or a hand-sewn pouch filled with herbs. These tokens carried deep meaning and were carefully chosen to convey sentiments that could not be spoken aloud. Even food could be a gesture of love. A freshly baked loaf of bread, warm and fragrant, offered with a shy smile. A pot of honey, its sweetness a metaphor for affection. A shared meal, eaten beneath the open sky or by the hearth's glow, was a communion of hearts as much as of bodies. Yet, with all these expressions of love, the rules of society loomed large. Public displays of affection were rare and often frowned upon, especially for women. Modesty and honor were prized virtues, and to protect these, many couples relied on subtlety, on the silent language of glances, gestures, and symbols. So, as you sink deeper into rest, let your mind wander through these scenes of minstrels singing beneath moonlit skies, of lovers exchanging secret gifts, of hearts beating quietly in the shadows. Their stories, though centuries old, remind us of the timeless dance of affection, desire, and hope that continues to shape us all. As the medieval world moved forward, so too did the customs surrounding courtship evolve, shaped by changing times, places, and beliefs. Yet through all the shifts, the essence remained the same. Love was a delicate balance of hope, tradition, and courage. Consider the role of faith in these relationships. The Church, a powerful force in medieval life, not only sanctified marriages but also influenced how courtship was conducted. Many believed that love itself was a divine gift, and seeking a partner was as much a spiritual journey as a worldly one. Priests often offered counsel, blessing engagements, and guiding young couples toward marriages that honored both God and community. Confession became a place where desires and fears could be voiced in secret, an intimate space where the burdens of the heart might be lifted, and forgiveness sought for transgressions, real or imagined. Love, in this context, was woven into the very fabric of one's soul, a force both sacred and profound. Yet, the Church's teachings also placed strict limits on behavior. Premarital intimacy was forbidden, and even innocent meetings required the presence of chaperones or took place in public spaces. These rules shaped the rhythms of courtship, encouraging patience and restraint. It was said that true love required endurance as much as passion. Within these boundaries, couples found creative ways to express their feelings. Pilgrimages to holy sites became opportunities not only for spiritual growth but also for companionship. Traveling together under the watchful eyes of fellow pilgrims, lovers could share stories, hopes, and moments of quiet reflection. The journey itself became a metaphor for the path of love, full of challenges, faith, and ultimately, grace. Moreover, the seasons brought their own sacred celebrations that intertwined faith and romance. Candlemas in February, a festival of light, was sometimes marked by candlelit processions where couples might exchange tokens or vows. St. Valentine's Day, though its modern associations were yet to be fully formed, began to be recognized as a time to honor love and devotion. All these customs framed a world where love was both a private feeling and a public act, a source of joy and a matter of duty. It required patience, courage, and sometimes sacrifice. And so, as you drift deeper into sleep, imagine the quiet prayers whispered in candlelit chapels, the soft murmur of vows exchanged beneath stained glass windows, the gentle touch of hands joined in faith. These moments, like stars in a vast sky, illuminate the timeless journey of love, guiding hearts across centuries and reminding us of the sacredness in connection. Within the stone walls of castles and the humble timber frames of cottages alike, the daily lives of medieval couples unfolded in rhythms both simple and profound. After the promises were made and the vows spoken, the true test of love began, not in grand gestures, but in the quiet endurance of shared life. Imagine a day in the life of a noblewoman who rises before dawn to the soft light filtering through narrow windows. She dons her gown, often richly embroidered but heavy with layers, and moves through the cool corridors to oversee the household. The kitchen bustles with activity. Servants chopping herbs, kneading dough, stoking fires. The air is thick with the scent of baking bread and simmering stews, mingled with the subtle perfume of lavender and rosemary. Her husband, the Lord, might be preparing for a day spent in the fields or the great hall, where he will attend to matters of governance and justice. Their paths may cross briefly in the morning, a quick exchange of words or a glance that speaks volumes more than any speech could. Meals were moments of gathering, where the family and retainers shared sustenance and stories. The clatter of wooden plates and the murmur of conversation filled the air. Sharing food was an act of connection, binding those at the table through the simple yet profound ritual of breaking bread together. In the evenings, after the day's labors, couples might find solace in quiet companionship. Perhaps seated near the hearth, they would listen to the crackle of flames, the soft footsteps of servants, or the distant sounds of the village settling into night. There was comfort in presence, even without words. A hand resting lightly on a knee, a shared look across the room. In peasant homes, the rhythm was different but no less meaningful. Life was dictated by the cycles of nature, planting, harvesting, tending animals, and by the needs of family. Yet even in this hard work, moments of tenderness found their place. A young couple might sit together by the fire after the day's toil, sharing a simple meal of porridge and fresh bread, their hands touching as they pass a wooden bowl or a cup of watered ale. Love was expressed in deeds as much as words, helping with chores, mending clothing, tending the garden. These acts built trust and intimacy, weaving a tapestry of partnership that sustained them through the hardships of medieval life. Yet challenges abounded. Illnesses were common, and the threat of war or famine loomed. Separation was frequent, as men went to battle or traveled for trade. Letters and tokens became lifelines, bridges spanning the distance and time between hearts. Through it all, love persisted. Not always grand or dramatic, but steady and true. It was the quiet flame that warmed cold nights, the whispered hope that brightened weary days. As you settle deeper into rest, picture these moments. The flickering firelight, the soft murmur of voices, the gentle touch of hands. In the vast tapestry of history, these are the threads that connect us all, reminding us that love, in all its forms, is the heart of human experience. In the sprawling world of medieval communities, neighbors and kin played a vital role in the dance of love and courtship. Life was rarely solitary. It was a web of interconnected relationships where gossip, reputation, and communal expectations shaped every step taken by those seeking affection. Imagine a village green, bathed in the soft glow of early evening. Children play among the flowers while elders sit nearby, their voices low but watchful, eyes flicking toward the young couples whose hands brush too boldly or whose laughter rings a little too freely. In this setting, courtship was not only a private affair but a social performance, where every glance and gesture was noted and judged. Families took a protective stance, especially where daughters were concerned. A young woman's virtue was prized and guarded as fiercely as any treasure, for her reputation could determine the family's honor and future prospects. Chaperones accompanied her to markets and festivals. Meetings with suitors were supervised, brief, and formal. Yet within these constraints, love found clever ways to flourish. Secret meetings behind barns, notes passed discreetly during church services, and stolen moments at the edge of the forest became the hidden language of affection. Lovers learned to speak in glances, to trust in the subtlety of touch, and to treasure the weight of a carefully chosen token. Community celebrations offered a rare chance for more open courtship. Weddings, harvest festivals, and saints' days brought everyone together in shared joy. Dancing was common, with simple steps and familiar tunes allowing couples to come close without scandal. The warmth of the crowd, the rhythm of the music, and the light of lanterns created a space where hearts could speak more freely. In some cases, neighbors acted as matchmakers, encouraging unions that would strengthen bonds between families or alleviate hardships. Their efforts could be both practical and heartfelt, a blend of social strategy and genuine care. But gossip was a double-edged sword. Rumors could lift a couple's prospects or shatter their hopes. A misstep, a whispered word, or a jealous rival's tale might darken a young lover's path, reminding all that love was as much a game of caution as of courage. As night falls and stars emerge, picture these village scenes. The soft murmur of conversations, the flicker of lantern light, the shy smile exchanged across a crowded room. These moments, though ordinary, carried the extraordinary weight of hopes and dreams, binding communities through the timeless stories of love's pursuit. Amidst the vibrant tapestry of medieval courtship, festivals and holidays stood as radiant jewels, moments when the strict rules of daily life softened, and joy mingled freely with hope. These celebrations were not merely occasions for merriment. They were essential threads in the social fabric, where communities gathered to honor traditions, the changing seasons, and, importantly, the bonds of affection. Picture a midsummer's eve, the longest day of the year, when villages burst into life with music, dance, and light. Torches blaze along pathways, casting flickering shadows on smiling faces. The air is fragrant with wildflowers and the smoke of bonfires. Men and women, young and old, come together dressed in colorful garlands, their laughter rising in the warm night air. Dancing is central to the celebration. The community forms a great circle around the blaze, hands joined in the ancient carol. Feet step in time to lively tunes played on fiddles and pipes, the rhythm compelling even the shyest to join. This dance is more than movement. It is a shared language, a release of joy, and, often, a subtle courting ritual. For the young, it is a chance to catch the eye of a beloved, to share a touch or a glance under the canopy of stars. Songs sung during these festivals tell tales of love and valor, of saints and sinners, weaving history and myth into melodies that linger long after the fire dies. Troubadours might take center stage, spinning stories that inspire laughter, tears, or dreams. These performances were not only entertainment but also social glue, reinforcing shared values and stirring the emotions that bring people closer. Food and drink abound. Tables grown with seasonal harvests, fresh fruits, hearty breads, salted meats, cheeses, and sweet honey cakes. Ale and mead flow generously, warming spirits and loosening tongues. Sharing a cup or breaking bread together is itself an act of communion, deepening bonds within the community and between potential partners. But festivals were also moments of tension and challenge. The close quarters, the swirl of emotions, and the mingling of families could spark jealousy or rivalry. A rejected suitor's glare, a whispered insult, or a jealous quarrel might flare unexpectedly, reminding all that love's path is rarely smooth. Yet, these trials were part of the dance. Moments that tested resolve, shaped character, and sometimes led to surprising unions. For many, it was during such nights of fire and song that the seeds of lasting love were planted, nurtured by the warmth of shared experience. As you drift deeper into rest, imagine yourself in that circle of dancers, feet moving in time, hands brushing, eyes meeting in silent promise. Hear the music that has echoed through centuries. Feel the pulse of life and love beneath the stars. These are the moments where history and heart converge, reminding us that love's story is forever unfolding. In the quiet moments between festivals and formal meetings, the art of conversation itself became a vital tool in medieval courtship. Words were chosen with care, layered with meaning, and delivered with the grace of a practiced performer. To speak well was to charm, to intrigue, to draw a beloved closer without ever crossing the delicate boundaries imposed by society. Imagine a twilight gathering in a noble's chamber, where candles flicker against tapestries depicting ancient legends. The young lord and lady sit nearby, their voices low and measured as they exchange stories and thoughts. Their conversation is a dance of wit and emotion, weaving compliments with subtle humor, revealing hopes without exposing vulnerability. Poetry was a favored form of expression. Lovers composed verses that praised beauty and virtue, often inspired by the ideals of courtly love, a concept that elevated romantic admiration to a near-sacred level, emphasizing honor, devotion, and longing. These poems could be recited aloud or slipped into letters, their flowery language both a shield and a beacon. Beyond poetry, storytelling was a cherished pastime. Tales of heroic knights, wise rulers, and enchanted forests stirred imaginations and provided a shared language of values and dreams. A story told with feeling could deepen a connection, revealing character and soul in ways plain speech could not. Listening was equally important. To truly hear another was to honor them, to acknowledge their worth. A lover's attentiveness, nodding at a story's turn, offering a thoughtful question, remembering a detail from a previous conversation, built trust and intimacy. In villages and towns, the marketplace or the church steps often served as informal stages for these verbal exchanges. Brief encounters, an exchanged greeting, a compliment on a well-crafted garment, or a question about a shared task could spark interest. Over time, these small moments grew into familiarity, then affection. Yet, the weight of decorum was never far away. Conversations had to be guarded, lest gossip twist words or families take offense. The skillful lover learned to speak plainly to a trusted heart while maintaining a public mask of propriety. So, as you sink further into rest, imagine these quiet conversations, words floating softly like leaves on a gentle stream, smiles exchanged in candlelight, stories unfolding like petals in spring. These delicate exchanges remind us that love is often built not on grand gestures, but on the tender art of truly seeing and hearing another soul. One cannot speak of medieval courtship without acknowledging the importance of gifts, not merely as tokens of affection, but as symbols loaded with meaning and intention. The giving and receiving of gifts was a delicate art, a language all its own, through which lovers expressed desires, promises, and social standing. Picture a young knight, newly returned from a campaign, presenting his beloved with a finely wrought ring, its gold band inlaid with a small sapphire, the color of the deep sea and the night sky. Such a gift was not given lightly. It spoke of commitment, of wealth, and of a future envisioned together. The ring would be worn as a public sign of betrothal, a declaration to the world that this union was blessed and binding. But gifts were not always so grand. A sprig of myrtle, symbolizing love and fidelity, tucked into a lady's sleeve could speak volumes without a word. A hand-embroidered handkerchief, scented with lavender or rose petals, was a cherished keepsake, a reminder of the giver's presence in moments of absence. Even a carefully carved wooden comb or a small pouch of herbs could carry meaning, treasured as tokens of care and thoughtfulness. Exchanging gifts often took place during festivals or social gatherings, where the act was as much about public acknowledgement as private affection. Presentation mattered, how the gift was wrapped, the words spoken during the exchange, and the reactions of those watching all added layers to the ritual. For some, gifts were a way to navigate social expectations. A nobleman might present a lavish gift to a lady of higher rank as a show of respect and honor, while common folk exchanged simpler tokens that nonetheless carried heartfelt meaning. In all cases, the gift was a bridge, connecting hearts, signaling intentions, and sometimes opening doors to future promises. Yet, with all this symbolism came risk. A misunderstood gift could cause offense, and an unwanted present might spark rumors. Thus, lovers learned to read each other's wishes and limits with care, attuned to the unspoken language that governed their exchanges. As your thoughts soften and your breath slows, envision these moments. The careful selection of a gift, the shy hand extended, the sparkling eyes as a token is received. These acts, though small, weave a rich tapestry of love and longing, reminding us that the simplest gestures often carry the deepest meanings. While gifts and words played their roles, the physical presence of lovers in the medieval world was governed by careful customs and expectations. Touch, in particular, was a language of its own, spoken in glances, brushes of fabric, or the fleeting press of a hand. Each gesture weighted with meaning and often constrained by the strict rules of propriety. Imagine a noble couple walking through the castle gardens, their path lined with blossoming roses and fragrant herbs. They walk side by side, the lady's gloved hand lightly resting near her companion's arm, close enough to feel the warmth but never quite touching. Each step is measured, a silent conversation unfolding between them, a gentle touch on the sleeve, a brief meeting of eyes. These small moments communicate what words dare not say aloud. For many, such subtle touches were the only permissible expression of affection before marriage. A mother or chaperone might observe closely, ensuring decorum was maintained. Public displays of passion were considered scandalous and could tarnish reputations permanently. Thus, lovers became experts in the art of discretion, finding ways to convey their feelings without crossing invisible lines. In quieter, private spaces, however, the rules relaxed. Within the safety of a chamber or a secluded garden nook, couples might exchange more intimate gestures, soft whispers, shared laughter, even the tentative brush of lips. These moments, rare and precious, offered a respite from the strictures of public life. Physical closeness was also shaped by practical realities. Beds were often shared with multiple family members or servants in modest homes, making privacy a luxury. Even among the nobility, chambers were drafty and communal. Thus, lovers prized these small opportunities, understanding that love was as much about patience and respect as it was about passion. These boundaries and customs shaped the course of relationships, encouraging emotional intimacy and trust alongside physical connection. They taught lovers to appreciate the slow unfolding of closeness, to savor the tension and release woven into each encounter. As your breathing slows and your mind drifts, picture these gentle moments, hands brushing softly, eyes meeting in quiet understanding, hearts speaking a language older than words. In this world of restraint and yearning, love found a voice in every touch, every glance, every breath shared between two souls. Beyond the personal rituals and quiet moments of affection, medieval courtship was deeply entwined with the world of religion and spiritual belief. The Church's influence shaped not only the formalization of marriage, but also the ways in which love and desire were understood and expressed. For many, seeking a partner was as much a matter of faith as of the heart. Picture a small stone chapel at dawn, its stained glass windows casting gentle rainbows onto cold flagstones. Inside, a young couple kneels side by side, hands clasped in prayer. Their whispered hopes and silent wishes mingle with the soft murmur of the morning prayers. In this sacred space, love is consecrated, a gift from God to be nurtured with reverence and humility. Many couples sought the Church's blessing before their unions, believing that divine approval was essential for a successful marriage. Priests often served as counselors, guiding lovers through the moral and social expectations that framed their relationships. Confessionals became places where fears, doubts, and desires were laid bare in trust, offering forgiveness and solace. Religious festivals and saints' days provided additional opportunities for social gathering and courtship, where faith and festivity intertwined. Processions, masses, and communal meals brought communities together in shared devotion and celebration. These events were fertile ground for meeting potential partners under the watchful eyes of the clergy and neighbors alike. The language of love was often infused with spiritual metaphor. Lovers likened each other to angels or saints, spoke of love as a divine fire, or sought to emulate the virtues of chivalry and purity. This blending of sacred and secular ideals created a unique tapestry, where passion was balanced by piety and desire by duty. Yet, the Church's strict teachings on chastity and fidelity imposed boundaries that shaped courtship's pace and nature. Physical intimacy before marriage was forbidden, and adultery was harshly condemned. These constraints required lovers to develop patience, creativity, and deep emotional bonds that transcended the physical. As you drift deeper into rest, imagine the quiet sanctuaries where faith and love met, where whispered prayers carried hopes, where vows were solemnized beneath vaulted ceilings, where the sacred and the human intertwined. These moments remind us that love, in its fullest form, touches both the heart and the soul. In the midst of all these customs and rituals, one of the most fascinating aspects of medieval courtship was the role of tournaments and chivalric competitions. These grand events were more than mere displays of martial skill. They were stages upon which knights demonstrated not only their valor but also their devotion to their chosen lady. Imagine the thundering hooves of armored riders charging across the lists, lances shattering upon impact, the crowd erupting in cheers and gasps. The air is thick with the scent of dust and sweat, mingled with the faint perfume of flowers woven into the lady's hair. Her gaze follows the battle with intensity, her favor, perhaps a ribbon, a scarf, or a handkerchief, tied to a knight's lance or helmet, symbolizing her blessing and the stakes of the contest. Victories in the tournament were often dedicated to these noble women, each lance thrust or sword strike a pledge of loyalty and admiration. The knight's prowess was not just for glory but a message. His skill in battle mirrored his dedication in love. Winning the favor of a lady could elevate a knight's standing and forge bonds that extended beyond the battlefield. But tournaments were also social occasions, filled with feasts, dances, and opportunities for courtship. Nobles and commoners alike gathered to witness the spectacle, to celebrate, and to mingle. In the soft glow of evening, beneath banners fluttering in the breeze, music played and couples danced, their movements echoing the rhythm of the day's contests. For the ladies, these events were moments of power and influence, a chance to observe, to choose, and to be chosen. Their presence was more than decorative. It was central to the rituals of chivalry and courtly love. Through their eyes and gestures, the stories of bravery and devotion were given life and meaning. As your mind drifts gently towards sleep, picture the clang of armor, the murmur of the crowd, the bright banners against the sky, and the subtle smile of a lady bestowing her favor. These scenes remind us that love, courage, and honor have long been intertwined, dancing together through the ages like the riders and their ladies beneath the medieval sun. While grand tournaments and noble dances captured the imagination, much of medieval courtship was woven into the daily tasks and rhythms of life. Moments often unnoticed by history, but deeply meaningful to those who lived them. The small acts of care, the shared labors, and the quiet companionship built the foundation for lasting relationships. Imagine a young couple working side by side in a village garden, hands tending the soil, planting seeds that will grow into food for the coming months. Their conversation is easy and light, punctuated by laughter and the occasional shy glance. The rhythm of their work mirrors the rhythm of their growing affection. Steady, patient, and full of promise. In households, women prepared meals, spun wool, and tended animals, while men repaired fences, chopped wood, or crafted tools. These tasks, demanding and mundane, became shared experiences that deepened bonds. Offering help, sharing knowledge, or simply being present during such work was a form of love, a way to show commitment and care. Meals taken together were more than nourishment. They were moments of connection. Breaking bread, sharing the day's stories, and passing around simple dishes of stewed vegetables, fresh bread, or salted fish became rituals that anchored relationships. The warmth of the hearth and the comfort of companionship made even the humblest meals rich with meaning. Evenings might be spent by the fire, where stories were told, songs sung, and plans for the future quietly made. These shared moments created a sense of partnership, a mutual investment in the life they were building together. Yet, even in these simple settings, the constraints of society were present. Respect for family, for tradition, and for community expectations shaped how couples interacted and planned for marriage. Engagements were often formalized through negotiations between families, with considerations of property, status, and alliances. Despite these pressures, love found a way to flourish, in the laughter shared during work, in the comfort of a steady presence, and in the gentle touches that spoke louder than words. As you relax deeper into sleep, picture these scenes of everyday life. The sun setting over a tilled field, the flicker of firelight on worn faces, the soft murmur of shared dreams. These quiet moments remind us that love, in all its simplicity and complexity, is the foundation upon which our stories are built. As the story of medieval courtship draws to its close, it's clear that love in those times was far more than fleeting passion or grand gestures. It was a journey of patience, respect, and deep connection woven through the fabric of daily life. The customs, rituals, and challenges faced by lovers centuries ago still echo in the way we seek and cherish relationships today. Picture once more the quiet moments shared by a couple beneath a sky full of stars, their hands gently intertwined as they whisper promises not just of romance, but of partnership and endurance. Their love is a testament to the strength found in vulnerability, the courage required to hope amid uncertainty, and the beauty of small acts that build a lifetime together. Through festivals filled with music and dance, the exchange of carefully chosen gifts, the written words that carried secret meanings, and the tender glances exchanged in shadowed gardens, medieval lovers navigated a world both enchanting and demanding. Their story reminds us that love is as much about the everyday, the shared meals, the whispered conversations, the steady presence in times of hardship, as it is about the extraordinary. And so, as you drift fully into rest, carry with you the timeless essence of love's journey, a dance across seasons and centuries, shaped by faith, tradition, and the unyielding human desire to connect. In the quiet stillness of night, remember that these ancient hearts beat on within us, guiding us toward our own stories of hope, courage, and lasting affection. Sleep well, and may your dreams be filled with the gentle light of love's enduring flame.